10:30 at night. I was in touch.
Okay, so last week we started with the whole thing of divorce not being such a terrible thing, right?
Nothing? My client will be glad to hear that. If I convince her of the way.
Right.
No, what I meant,
That's
I
it.
thought,
Yeah.
when I mentioned Chava at the very beginning, I thought that we were told before she was...
Right, that was the first one.
The lead.
Right.
Yes, I did.
Well, no, she was Chava also, but she devolved. She wasn't originally like that. She was originally good, and then she devolved. Anyway, so the whole thing was based on the notion that a second marriage is not necessarily what Chazal called a second zivug. It's not exactly what we think it is. So we usually think the second zivug means that a person got married or got divorced, and
Make sure it's okay. I think it is.
and so now their second marriage is the second attempt. But what we began to explain last week is that actually these terms are very even unclear in the Gemara. We'll see in a moment. Even in the Talmud, they're not so clear what exactly it means. And we said that there are actually two types of relationships. That's what first zivug and second zivug is really referring to. It's referring to two types of relationships between people.
Like Rachel and Leah.
So you could say that the archetypal form of there being two types of relationships is for Yidden is Yaakov with Rachel and Leah. But even before that, we said there's Adam Arishon with his two wives, with the first Chava and second Chava. And the interesting thing is that the second Chava, even though things take a turn for the worse, take a turn for the worse after they're banished from Gan Eden, but they're able to repair it. And with first Chava, he's never able to really repair it, and until today, it's like it's a problematic issue. So, what we want to do today is I want to take you more to the sources, okay? To the sources of this whole issue in the Talmud. So, in order to take you to the sources, I would have had to brought a different book, which I didn't, which is very nice. So I'll have to tell you by heart. It's a book called Mechol HaKramim.
The one you're looking at now?
No, the one I'm looking at now doesn't have it.
Called the name of the book you're looking at now.
What I'm looking at now is called Etzpri.
It's prayer.
Okay.
And are you going to say what has to be taken from the first?
Yes.
Did you, is this what you already talked about? Or is
We talked a little bit about this last
Same
week,
book,
but now
right?
I want to build it
but
more
It's the same book.
to how you use it in marriage itself, not just how to look at divorce. The whole idea we saw last week was that the Mishnah starts with divorce and then it gets to Kiddushin, if you remember that. So we said there's something about divorce that a person has to come with a sense that he's already divorced, as it were, and now he has to build things. So that's a very healthy sense, actually, even if it's your first marriage. So I want to explain what that means today. I want to explain it much better. Okay. So first of all, I want to get into this topic of first marriage and second marriage, which really is not a very good translation of the word zivug. Zivug is like a match. Okay? And so, for instance, in the Arizal's language, in Kabbalah, zivug is the name we use for any interaction. It doesn't have to necessarily be a physical interaction. There can be interactions that are not physical that are called the zivug. Like an encounter between two people, just an encounter. So if they hit it off, it's a zivug. There is something called zivug neshikin, which is a match that goes through the mouth. Neshikin means to kiss, but it doesn't necessarily mean to touch physically. It can also mean neshikin is like to approach one another. Noshkim ze lazeh. It's called noshkim ze lazeh. Okay.
No, it's interesting in Sunset, it's a new big thing that they just discovered that, maybe you saw it, that if a woman had been with a man sexually, that she stores in her brain cells his DNA.
I heard that thing.
Yeah.
You heard it?
It was a big.
So
Yeah, I
might
didn't
be
see-
true.
I don't know.
They were
I
studying
read it
something
when
else, and then
this suddenly
and
came out.
actually This thing came out. This unbelievable. Yeah.
Stored it, now how does she get it into her DNA?
Who knows?
Somehow it ends up in the DNA.
Just from
Saliva?
From a contact, no, having sexual contact with a man.
We're having physical contact. You have to have physical contact.
So it's that, those pheromones or whatever the body's carrying.
Well, I didn't understand all the sort of the scientific side about it, but
Cool.
In any case, let's see. In the Gemara it says like this. Reish Lakish said that the first zivug, that Reish Lakish starts, Rabbi Yochanan, starts, he says, it's in Sota, in daf, in the first daf. So he says, Kashe zivugo shel adam lefi ma'asav. He says, according to a person's deeds, that's the match that he gets. It's dependent on his needs, on his deeds, on how he acts. So if he's a righteous person, he receives a righteous zivug. And if he's not, he doesn't.
in the first zivug.
No, it doesn't say it. That's a statement, a blanket statement that he says. The zivug depends, meaning your couplehood depends on your actions. And that's basically how somebody would think about it today.
What about Reb Zusha? What about?
Oh, just a second. But normally, if I would talk to a modern person,
You don't see people who get great spouses that the other one you're saying, how did I know?
so how could that be? I mean, normally you go out with somebody and you see how they are, and somebody who's not nice is not going to get married to them. People match in that sense. It's like saying that matches are made based on people's behavior. It makes sense. But then Reish Lakish, his brother-in-law, he says to him, but we know that the person's zivug is determined 40 days before the neshama goes into the body.
Right.
Well, they're going to act just the right way to get
So how can you tell me that it's dependent on his deeds? So says Rabbi Yochanan, in return, you're right, but that's the first zivug, and I'm talking about the second zivug. Okay, that's where he makes the differentiation. So he says the first zivug is mishamayim, that they decree it in heaven before a person is married, before a person is born. And the second zivug is dependent on his behavior. So the first thing that comes to mind is, what do you mean by zivug sheni? So stam pshat is, zivug sheni means a person was either widowed or divorced. But it's not built into the discussion. Not at all even. There's no necessity to understand that way. So the Meiri, who's the first Rishon who takes this a little bit apart, and he says, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish were talking about their times. When did people get married back then? Around age 13. So he says, Zivug Rishon is when a person gets married before or about the age of 13. And says the Meiri, and Zivug Sheni is when he gets married older. So here we see right away that there's a Rishon, one of the first Rishonim, the Meiri, and he writes that it's not talking here about a first marriage and second marriage. It's talking about the preparation, or the age, the maturity of the person getting married. That if he's immature, meaning he's around 13, so then the zivug is decreed in heaven. What does it mean it's decreed in heaven? He says like everything else about a person before he's 13, it's not based on your behavior, right? Before you're 13, there's no avera, there's no sin before you're 13. Right? You don't get punished for it. Even in Beit Din Shel Mata, even in a civil court. Because you're not a punishable age yet. You're a minor. So there, if you got married near that age, then that was the result of what they decreed in heaven. It's like your nature. It's describing your nature, your mazel. Nature in Hebrew is called mazel. That's one of the words that we use. And again, the reason is because the person's too young to be able to be accountable for his behavior. So the zivug is, and usually how is it carried out? It's carried out by the parents. So the parents look at the natural proclivities, the natural characteristics, the character of their child, and they look for somebody who would fit them. What happens when you get married when you're older, says the Meiri? Then it depends on your behavior. Because now you've already, that's the whole thinking about life, is that you definitely have a nature that you began with, but as you begin to act out of free will, out of your will, you begin to either surpass your nature or fall below it. Right. Well, Teva Shani means that you've worked so hard on something, you've turned it into a second nature. But it came through your behavior, through your hard work. Right? So it's a natural, so he understands, the Meiri, that Zivug Shani doesn't mean a second marriage. It means getting married in a second period of life, where your life is now determined by your behavior. What do you call this? The classic language in English it's called nature and nurture. Right? The nurture sounds like somebody else is nurturing you, but it could also be you nurturing yourself. Okay? Nurture means that it depends on your actions. Okay? So Zivug Rishon is my nature, Zivug Shani is my nurture, it's my behavior. So we right away find a Rishon who says that the whole idea of Zivug Rishon and Zivug Shani is not pshat. It's not how you would maybe talk about it in colloquial Hebrew. The Zivug Shani means somebody was divorced or widowed and they got married a second time. Okay.
I used to say maybe it's like in this world, the next world, or one incarnation, another incarnation. Like how can you even say that this?
So why would you call that the Zivug though? No, Zivug means that there is a relationship between two people.
Of course, but I mean, this is very limiting. We're thinking of it in terms of
right,
a very limited way because of our life
Right. You have to start opening up the idea that there's first and second doesn't necessarily mean a full marriage and a divorce, or a full marriage and a being widowed. Okay, so that's the Meiri. Let's see what else comes out. What comes out of this? We'll return to this later on. But when a person gets married when they're very young, so for us this would also be somebody who gets married when they're 17 maybe, or 16. In their time it was 13. Again, sometimes you might think, actually, the truth is, today maybe 23 is even still like they're 13. Meaning maybe the person still doesn't understand how dependent where his life is going to go is on his actions, on his or her actions. Right? People are still dependent on their parents in such a way that they don't feel that anything really is their responsibility. So in that sense, you could say that anybody who gets married before age maybe 23 or 24 even is not responsible. Okay? It's a Zivug Rishon. And anybody who gets married after that is like a Zivug Shani, is like a second marriage. What's the big difference between getting married young and getting married older? We hope this is the big difference. The maturity. What's the difference in the maturity? That when you're younger, you have, call it, a naive picture of what marriage is about. The naive picture says you get married and that's it. And it lasts forever and ever, right? And it's called they lived happily ever after. The only problem is meeting, right? That's the only issue. That's when you're young. And as you get older, you understand that the moment of the meeting is just the beginning of the story. And really everything that came up to the meeting is not important anymore. And really what's going to determine the marriage is everything that happens afterwards. Okay? So there's no happily ever after without a long, long story. There has to be a very long story describing this happily ever after. One way of characterizing this, and probably the strongest, is to say that when a person gets married young, zivug rishon, as Amiri calls it, his love depends on something, meaning it's called ahava shetluya b'davar. What is it dependent on? It's conditional. It's conditional that it works. Okay? It's conditional that maybe the husband says to the wife, because you're beautiful. And the wife says to the husband, because you're sitting in yeshiva still, and you're so holy because that's all you do, because you only learn. But they haven't gone into the world yet. So commitment is saying ahava she'eina tluya b'davar. Like a mature person is able to say, I commit to something without conditions, okay? Out of devotion to this, regardless of its ups and downs, and regardless of what you look like, regardless of where you'll be, and how if you'll be sitting in a yeshiva, or you'll be learning maybe just an hour a day, or maybe you won't learn at all for whatever reason. It's not conditional anymore. That's the sign of maturity. So zivug sheni in this sense, and remember, this is in pshat, zivug sheni is like a divorce. Somebody who's been divorced and he gets married again. So this is right away an understanding of how you have to come into marriage. That if you come into marriage just with the feeling of zivug rishon, that everything is conditional, and the moment that it's not what I expected it to be, I'm bailing. So that's a sign of immaturity. That's a zivug rishon. And you have to bring it to zivug sheni. The person has to enter marriage already with some knowledge of zivug sheni. Except, what's the problem? That if I tell somebody, you should be like divorced before you got married, meaning you should have a zivug sheni before. So to tell them grow up, it's fine, but to tell them if marriage is not what you thought, maybe they won't get married. Maybe they'll say, well, so in truth, there's something. It has to be something in the middle. It's not exactly that you tell them, it's nothing like what you think. You have to wait for the moment, in a certain sense, where they break, where something happens, and then you lift them. But you can't break them yourselves. Like we say this a lot of times. Our duty is not to break somebody, because we don't know how to break somebody the right way. If we break them, they might fall into pieces, and we'll never figure out how to put it back together again. Only Hashem knows how to do these things. So once something has fallen apart, so now you already know that there's a problem here, meaning the person who's coming for counseling. So now let me try to help you bring it back together again. But still there has to be something that I prepare in an adult. I have to prepare them in a certain way for marriage. So that we'll talk about a little bit later. But there has to be like some kind of second zivug here before you get married. So it's not exactly divorce, it's not exactly being a widow. It has to be something else. You have to have some other type of experience in order to enter into commitment that doesn't have conditions to it, that doesn't add conditions to it. Okay?
But I think you cannot get married into a second zivug right away. You have to go through the first stage, no?
So what we're saying here is that first and second, you understood that we're saying that first and second is not that I was married once.
I'm talking about maturity.
Ken, so you always,
Expectations.
right, so you had expectations maybe when you were 15, 16, you have dreams about what marriage is like, then you call it happily ever after.
25 don't?
No, so I said maybe today it's until maybe age 24, maybe even 25. But you want to prepare somebody for marriage. So you want to have them also have some experience of a second zivug, some experience of what it means to have an unconditional love for somebody. Or to allow love, instead of saying to love unconditionally, maybe the better way of saying it is to allow love to grow unconditionally. Meaning don't put conditions on what allows the relationship to grow and to flourish. That's the...
So this is where there are so many divorces.
Right.
Yes.
there's a lot of divorces now of people that got married very young,
Right.
and then they suddenly wake up and they say, "This is not what this is not what I signed up for." So they're still in zivug rishon. They've never really matured into understand. It's not always possible to save it, but I suspect that a lot of the cases are that people don't appreciate where they're coming from,
Sounds like
how
a-
childish their outlook still is. Meaning, you're talking in other areas of life, they've matured because they didn't start working until they were 25, let's say. So they learned about work that it's not exactly what you thought it was. You know, it's not about, you can't make money quickly, there's no such thing, there's no free lunches, all the stuff that you learn after a long time. It's a lot about just hard work. A lot of times the pay is it takes a long, long time until something happens. So that they know, they're very mature about that. But when it comes to their relationship, they're stuck. Meaning, you have to get them out of that childish space, that somehow the relationship is supposed to be the one place in my life that everything just works perfectly. That's like a certain...
Hard work.
what?
It's hard work.
It's hard work, but you have to do it,
It sounds
especially
like a good
since...
class to have.
What?
It's a good class for you guys to put together and promote.
Hey, that's what we do that all the time. What do you mean?
Well, but people, I mean, you got to promote it. People don't know this, you know.
Can't settle. Yeah, it's just, we expect you to teach it, work with it. Okay. I remember the first time that I met a couple like this. They were very, very. This was long before I started seeing people. I must have been 19 when I experienced this. It was a very what would you call it? Like nobility, like from nobility. People, two sons, a daughter and a son of two really great rabbanim.
Yes.
And well, they weren't. I wasn't Lubavitch then, so it was a Gesha from a different world, and it was even worse because it's not even Gesha. It's like people who really the parents are really, scholars and holy people, and they decided that they would marry their children because they fit, right? They're both very holy and very from and so on. So these kids, they got married when I guess they were 17. And I met the husband after he was already divorced, or very close to it, I think. And I was in Shidduchim then, and I don't know why we discussed it. He was in the same yeshiva that I was in. He came back to yeshiva after, or near his divorce, whatever it was. And then we discussed these things, and he wasn't the type to give a tirade, but he spoke at least for 20-30 minutes about the horrendous, terrible thing that parents do to their children by marrying them through a shidduch. It's like he was so against it. He's like, you can't. There's no. His mom was traumatized by it. They had 4 or 5 children already when they got divorced. So there's a lot like this today. I was just dealing with somebody a few months ago that was like that. I couldn't get through to him. He also had other issues. He was bipolar and other stuff. But it was very difficult. It was very difficult to even find an inroad because he was so intellectually advanced but so immature. He couldn't see that's why I said they advance in many other areas. They become very, very complex people, but their emotions, when it comes to their marriage, they don't see that they're talking like 5-year-olds. Mamish, like somebody who's just read a fairy tale, and you know what? The pony is not the same color as as in the coloring as in the book, right? There's an illustration in the book, and it's a different color. Stuff mamish like that, and I found it very difficult to get through them. In the end, he stopped coming because it just didn't help him. But I don't know if he's divorced yet or not. In any case, he was already separated back then. But that left a very strong impression on me for a long time until I read Rav Ginsburg's things about it, and I realized that it has a lot to do with what do you do when things fall apart. Like, what do people have to tell these young couples when things don't work? There's another couple that I saw, and this you can suspect right away, but when people aren't, they didn't get married because of a process, they're not used to communicating. They don't know how to communicate, in fact. And so I had this one couple, they were both very, very young when they got married. So even before I started seeing them, I knew that there would be this issue that they don't talk to each other.
Common language.
They don't talk. They're afraid of even talking. In a certain sense, it even leaves you in a place where, God forbid, I should find out that my spouse is not who I thought they are. But it's stupid things. It's not like even, he's not a serial murderer. He's not like he's eating treif in the bathroom. It's nothing like that. It's just that, people have things that tick them off. They have triggers. They have this. They have that. Don't get so upset about it. You learn how to live with it. You learn how to react to it the right way. But when there's no communication, it becomes like the end of the world. And they simply don't know how to even do this. So you have to facilitate the very simple level of what did you feel when you take one of those crashes and you begin to have you're like a police interrogator. So what did you feel when that happened? Oh, very good. She's never heard this. What did you feel when he reacted this way? And you begin to unravel this whole, and no one said a word. It's unbelievable. They go on for days and weeks, holding stuff in.
Imagination.
All built on imagination. They have no idea what's happening on the other side. So the truth is, a lot of stuff in the world could be solved if people communicated, because people are not necessarily negative. But here it becomes like almost that if you take this, if I would communicate, it would take away from the romantic vision, maybe if that's what you want to call it, the sort of this, let's not touch it because it's perfect, right? Because it's supposed to be exactly perfect. That's a certain type of naivete. It could be that they couldn't have gotten married any other way. But once they're in the marriage and these things come up, and they come up after the first child, second child, eventually they'll come up. I mean, almost. If they don't, I'm a tzaddikim, so that's very good also. I don't have to bring them up for them. But once they happen, our role is to help facilitate moving the couple into a more mature state, into the second zivug, within their first marriage, right? Within their marriage.
They say about Yitzhak and Rivka, they didn't speak much to each other. Well, maybe they were on a higher level, but they knew what each other was.
So you're saying the
Maybe
goal
it's
is
the
to
wrong
move a couple to
example.
Zivug Sheni in the same context of the Zivug
Right,
Rishon,
right.
roll them up into
Right.
the Zivug Sheni.
Roll them there. Bring them there. Okay. So that's the Meiri. Now comes, and again, the simplest way to understand it is conditional love or unconditional love. And like I said, I'm not crazy about the word loving unconditionally. I think that you have to talk about love maturing unconditionally, meaning that I'm going to allow love to build itself regardless of the circumstances. Meaning not to give up on. There was a book used to be in Israel. I think it was translated into a lot of languages. It was called Haim Yasikui Lava. Is there a chance for love? And it was translated in many. It had a picture of the Rebbe on the cover, even though the guy isn't the Lubavitcher.
An action picture.
Right. So
Very powerful.
it's a very strong book. And basically he's not talking about love between couples, he's just talking about love between people and the love of oneself even, and many other things. But the thing to take from that, I think from that title, is there a chance for love? Yes. That unconditionally there always is. Meaning not to give up on it. That's I think what keeps a couple really together in the end. It's not how much love has already been created, rather in places where it seems that love can't flourish, still give it a chance. Still allow it to happen. Don't put conditions on where love can come out or where it can't. It's almost like life in that sense. There's also people who say that love and life are actually etymologically related.
What is it? Etymology? Is that words?
Etymologically. Their origin is the same.
Origin, what is it, do you know?
It's a grammatical source. So
Yeah, but do you know what it is?
Like in German, Lieb. Lieb is both life and it's very close to love. How to say love? I think the
like
same
the
thing.
anatomy of a word.
I know.
Okay.
Kind of giving up.
So now, from this, so we come to the Ari, and the Ari already completely conceptualizes Zivug Rishon and Zivug Sheni. And for the Arizal, it's like we just said, it's just any meeting. It's whether you're meeting for the first time or for the second time. That for him,
Chronologically?
yeah. Any meeting, any level of contact between two entities. So there's the initial one is called Zivug Rishon, and the second one is called Zivug Sheni. And it could be at any level. It could be a spiritual
The
level.
first time you meet someone and the second time you see the same person, or a
Right.
different
It
person?
could be a person. It could be an idea.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes it's a perush that you learn on Torah, for instance. Yeah. But
Nice.
he completely conceptualizes it.
Seeing a movie a second time.
Okay, so that's another one. Obviously, this is more applicable. Real relationship is more applicable to another conscious being. It's not so much. You could say that our relationship with Hashem goes through Zivug Rishon and Zivug Sheni. That as children we have the old bearded man in the heavens picture, and that's like the Zivug Rishon, and that's how you, hopefully, most people have that. That's a very big deal to have that, like in your basis. Okay,
That particular picture?
Yeah, I used to think that because children are very good at conceptualizing things, even though we think that they only can handle concrete images. But it turns out that they're willing to delay understanding for a long time, because that's the only way you can learn language. So you pick up a word, but you don't know exactly what it means, so you start using it, and sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong. Eventually you get it. So they're very good at delaying gratification about knowing something. Adults are more polite maybe, but they're not very patient. So if I use a word too many times, a word you don't know too many times, eventually you'll say, so what does that mean? Why are you using it? But a child won't say, what does it mean? Like they'll leave it. They'll just let it go. And eventually they'll get whatever they get. So I used to have this picture that it's important to raise children without a particular concept of what Hashem is. Just say Hashem is everything and more than everything. Just do that. But then I realized, what?
That's your idea?
That's my adult idea. Okay. But then I looked at myself and said, I had a very traditional upbringing when it comes to relationship with Hashem. Very traditional. Hashem is, also the one who punishes you and all those things. But nonetheless, the picture that my parents put in my head was, and this never changed, was an old man in heaven. An old Saba. There's I can't get that out of my head no matter what I try. I don't understand it this way today, but I have that picture.
But if
So
your
for-
parents would have put a different picture, and maybe you wouldn't have done
My parents didn't know between left and right.
But if
They
if,
put in
if,
me-
if,
Right,
Well,
but
what was
but
that
they put in me the traditional Jewish picture. That's what they did. Like they didn't have any foilshtick. They couldn't tell you anything was like this or like that. They just did what their parents did for them. And so after a while, so I asked the Rav, what is this picture that I have in my head? Is it good? Is it bad? He says, what do you mean? That's the traditional Jewish picture. Because in the end, Hashem is Rachum v'Chanun. In the end, you have to feel that Hashem is full of rachamim for you. He's full of mercy for you. That has to be the initial point of departure for your relationship. That's the Zivug Rishon. Zivug Sheni is, it's not so simple. You're right, but a very astute and smart old man wants you to bring out your potential. And he's going to do many, many things, amongst them even punishing you, to get you to do that. And you're right, everything is out of compassion. Everything is because he loves you and because he cares for you. But it might be very, very difficult. I mean, tremendously difficult.
First and second of all.
Okay. That's like the person's own.
So that's Zivug Sheni, Hashem wants to bring out your potential.
So you could also be full of a lot of din. when a really old man gets angry, it's much worse than a young person getting angry. You feel it, because it also awakens a lot of awe in you, not just fear. And and it awakens a lot of busha, whereas a lot of shame. Whereas with a younger person, maybe you'll feel fear, but I don't think you'll feel, if somebody my age gets angry at me, so we don't see eye to eye. Maybe I'm not ashamed of myself. But when somebody older that I feel is a father figure, right, he gets angry at me, so there's a lot of shame that results from that. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that it's a much more complex relationship. And so I don't just have this picture that he's just a sweet old man anymore. And all the more so when you start learning Kabbalah and Chassidut, and especially Jewish philosophy. So you have this picture of Hashem is much more complex than that. That there's a lot more going on than just his relationship with you, right? There's a lot more than that. That's also one of the things about first zivug and second zivug. First zivug is all about us. And second zivug, you might say right away, when children are born or there's something that happens in the family, so it becomes more complex. You're already in a zivug sheni, type of relationship. So again, the Ari, he completely conceptualizes the whole idea. And so he says something very interesting. He says that zivug rishon is really very rare. It almost never happens.
Rishon.
Right.
Are you saying that?
Good. It's so rare, in fact, that it only happens to new souls. Right? Because what does it mean? It means that you've never encountered this ever before. You've never had any encounter with either the soul or this idea or Hashem in this way. It says only a new soul can feel really what it means to have zivug rishon. And so it's not even, or it's not really relevant to us in that sense. How could it be relevant to us? So first of all, for the Arizal, everything is zivug sheni. Like basically everything that's happening in the world is a second relationship. How could it be related to, how does it relate to us? That even though we've encountered things before, we do have our first nature. We do have the way we initially respond to something. At the very uncouth, very direct, like almost, call it wild nature that we have, which in that sense is like a neshama chadasha, it's like a new soul. It's never really encountered any of these issues, people's problems, whatever they are. And there you have a certain sense of your zivug rishon. But like you understand, it's usually very tohu. It's chaotic. And so instead of being this romantic picture of zivug rishon being some happily ever after, the Arizal Mamash turns it on its head, and it becomes that the zivug rishon is some chaotic thing that can never last. It's not.
Unrectified?
It's unrectified, right? It's an
Animal soul first
and usually it comes from the animal soul, right? You could get some of it from the divine soul also, but even with the divine soul, it'll be unrectified. Meaning that even with the divine soul, it'll be like the first time that a person davens. There's, as much as it's an incredible experience, it can't last, meaning it has no vessels. You can't, unrectified, remember, means that it has no vessel. Like tikkun means to put something in a vessel. So it's just an experience. In that sense, the zivug rishon is like the light, and zivug sheni is like the vessels. What's the big difference between zivug rishon and zivug sheni, according to the Yorid then? will, whether I have will involved or not. A zivug rishon is like a chance encounter. It's like a chance encounter. It's almost impossible for me to want to encounter something for the first time. They're almost always by chance. That's another way of saying it's b'mazal, right? It's been decreed this way that you would have to meet this idea at this day, on this time, at this moment. But as far as you're concerned, it's no choice of yours. It just happened.
This is still the Ari, or this is?
This is the Arizal. What's lacking? My choice, my will. My will is not involved. The moment that my will gets involved, that's already a zivug sheni. Because now I want a second meeting. I want something more than that. So for Yaakov to get married to Rachel, so it's a little complex. The fact that he fell in love with her the first moment, what was that? That was a zivug rishon, because it happened by chance, right? He didn't plan on Lavan's daughter. He didn't know whether he had daughters. Maybe he knew, I don't know, but he definitely didn't plan on her being there at that moment when he came. And so he sees her and he falls in love at first sight. That's zivug rishon. But then his decision that I'm willing, and that's what Lavan actually, you could say in the sense Lavan is rectified. He wants her to be vessels. He asks, are you willing to work 7 years to bring your first love into something more permanent? Show me that you have will behind this, that it's not just some chaotic chance encounter. Interestingly, what ends up happening?
14 years, not.
First of all, he worked for 14 years, not 7. But what about Leah?
That was totally by chance.
That was totally by chance. He had absolutely no will involved in that. Okay.
She said, that is what she said in the beginning. Leah is the.
Yeah, but most people understand that Rachel is like his first zivug, and Leah is his second. Here the understanding is that it's actually Leah, surprisingly, with whom it was a zivug rishon. And we see that that's how it is, because we see that with Leah, even though it says kisnuah, that she was hated, but we never hear of anything negative going on between them. The Torah just says this. We don't know. Maybe she thought she was. But with Rachel, we hear. Vodech, we hear. Like they have a lot of issues. So it's not always, the moment you get into the Ari's conceptualizing of these two concepts, it's not always the pshat of how you read things until now. It could be very different from what you think it is. So the challenge, according to the Arizal, is to create volition, is to create will. And for the Arizal, it's a necessity to move from zivug rishon to zivug sheni. It's not just a nice thing. Meaning, according to the Meiri, according to the Gemara, right? What we're seeing here is that as time goes by, as the Torah develops, or as the oral Torah develops, we move from a state in which the ideal is the zivug rishon, the first relationship, and the b'di'evid, like de facto, is the second. But as we move forward in time, so the Meiri already says, he's not saying that the first one doesn't work. He says if people get married at age 13, so it could work. By the way, what did that look like? It was a very natural type of relationship, meaning they never got into anything maybe deep, or if they did, it came naturally as they matured, but everything worked well together. There were no real squeaks. He's not saying it doesn't work, he's just saying it has to be all natural. When we move into the Ari, the picture of Mamish flips already, and it becomes the opposite. That the Ikar, the main thing is to get to a zivug sheni. It's to arrive at a second relationship. Because the first relationship is actually chaotic. It's chance. Too much is left to chance. And you can't get somebody to commit and to invest themselves in something that they didn't want. It's very hard to get somebody to commit to something that's been decreed above. So what's the Zivug Rishon for? If it doesn't serve any purpose. So even the Arizal, the world of Tohu, serves a great purpose. What's the purpose? What's the whole purpose of Tohu? What's the whole purpose of chaos?
To create rectifications.
To be rectified.
Free will.
The-
To build kingdom.
So what's its purpose though? Why do I have to have at my core this world of chaos? Why do I have to be
Creating choices.
broken inside?
To repair.
So if I could just be repaired, then we'd be
Repair the
fine.
way you want to repair.
Okay.
You exercise your free will not just to fix, but to rectify in the way you're co-creating with Hashem. It's not
This is like Achna before Havdalah. What does Achna give us? Shifrut. It says the whole idea of to have Tohu there is to understand that this is not you're not you're not as great as you think you are. Okay. In other words, even when marriage is good, okay, so a person could say, we worked really hard and we got to something. So he says, what's at the core of this marriage in the end? Still, there's something there that you met. Why did you meet? That was Hashem who gave you that. Ken, you worked very hard. We're not taking that away from you. But at the core, there has to be shiflut, that if Hashem wouldn't have given me the opportunity, then I wouldn't have been able to create love here in this relationship. The first meeting, the meeting itself, the fact that we even met, that was decreed in Shemayim. You can't build on that. That's nothing to build on. It's broken even. But it gives me a sense that it's not kochi v'otzmidi. It's not my strength that brought me to the place that I am. There always has to be like this point in the center that is my blind spot that I couldn't have created. That's what it serves in the Arizal's picture. Right? In the center of my marriage, as hard as I've felt that I've worked with my wife, in the end, even the fact that we are together, to be able to work together, that comes from Hashem. That's not ours. We didn't create that situation. The tohu at the source gives you the shiflus so that you don't, in the end, aggrandize yourself completely for everything. It's like a achna'ah before the havdalah. And the havdalah here is to create a good marriage.
Why is that Havdalah? What's the separation?
Because to create a good marriage, you have to find your divine souls, right? It's the higher you that maybe even is created out of the joining of the two souls, but it's Havdalah as something greater, something bigger than what you were until now. Okay. So for the Arizal, Zivug Rishon is like a tohu that always stays there. It's always there in a sense, and it's lingering behind, just like any averos that you have do, in order to teach you shifnut. That's all. Just so that you acknowledge that it's Hashem who brought us together. And then, if you're very smart, you understand that you don't get married once; you get married every day. And even the fact that you can work on things, meaning that you're healthy enough that you can work on it, whatever it is, that you have the opportunity to work, that you're still together, that itself is a gift from Hashem. That's like a zivug rishon there. That's been decreed in Shemayim that you should be together today, so that you can work on it, and tomorrow so you can work on it, and so on. And people miss that, meaning they so much live in this taking for granted. This comes for a lot of people, this comes with wisdom of years. They suddenly realize that not everything can be taken for granted. But and the young people, they don't get it. So, especially the ones who have like a zivug, who got married at a younger age, they don't see the zivug rishon that way. They sort of see it as like it's a law of nature that we're supposed to be together. So now I'm fighting against nature. No, it's the other way around. The fact that nature put you together is only the beginning. And what you need to acknowledge is this was a miracle from Hashem, that you're together. Now you have to start working. Again, the problem is that in Zivug Rishon there's no volition. I didn't want it. And when a person didn't choose something, it's very hard to get them to commit to work for it. Supposedly, that's why a second marriage is supposed to be much better than a first one. Right? Because in a second marriage, well, you already knew everything could go wrong. Why did you choose to get married? But surprisingly, it doesn't help. I think the divorce rate in second marriages is like twice the divorce rate in first marriages.
But you can't say that people didn't want...
Something like that. It's very, very high.
People
Today,
just don't
most
learn.
people get married without the... Unlike Yaakov and Leah.
Right, no, because most people get married at a later age. At a later
Most
age.
people, they don't have the parents making, and even so, even if they did, at least met a couple times.
No, I agree. Even meeting a couple of times is not... Again, it depends on the age. It's not so much how many times you met. You know, even very young people that would by the Goyim, you see this a lot, that, 16, 17-year-old girls that they got pregnant and then they got married. So sometimes those marriages last and sometimes they don't. They don't see it as it's not, okay, it doesn't help that they knew each other very well before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's this phenomenon of a lot of marriages switching up in the secular world, in the religious world now, where the couples have been married for many years, and through change of life, suddenly. So as you're talking, very often, and I've seen this with friends of mine that who want to leave, but it's always said that it's a different. I've never had the language. Could that be your zivug showing that you actually have to go into a different gear? But I and a few of my friends, we talk like this. And you've just got to shift into a different expectation of marriage and a relationship. So that's like going into your second marriage.
I'm a big believer in exactly what you said, like a different language. That the language, it's not just communication. I mean, for young people, maybe it's even just learning to communicate. For older people, it's learning another language. Is becoming open to a different language. And in my opinion, the language they need to hear is exactly this language that builds things spiritually and to begin to think, because it tremendously helps. I mean, just even trying to come out of this very only psychological even. Psychological in a lot of senses is interest-oriented language. What are your interests? Meaning interest in the Hebrew sense, meaning what are your
Like personal interest?
no now what do you want to get? What are your motives? Right, motives. What are your goals? Psychology takes it very much in that direction and tries to find some kind of way to get the goals aligned or working better together or something like that. That each side understands how the other one is motivated and so on. That helps, but it stays still in the same realm. And talking about things this way, I think, is a different language altogether. And the moment that you have another language, you have another way of thinking about things. And again, because motives and goals I know from business, I know it from work, I know it from a million areas. I know how that works. But to hear a spiritual language is a whole new thing. Yeah.
You said that the challenge is to create will.
Right.
So if the challenge is to create will, is it that we're really creating a will within ourselves, or are we revealing Hashem's will and we're becoming the implementation of
It's
His will?
both of them. That's why I said you have to have the Zivug Rishon. Really, the Zivug Rishon is telling you that at least Hashem wants this. That's chaotic for me, because my will is not involved. But it does two things. First of all, it gives me some background, meaning some basis, some foundation to rest on. And secondly, it takes away from my hubris. It takes away from, when things do work, when do people fall? People really fall hard when they first feel that they're on, that they're succeeding.
And what?
When they feel that they're succeeding, they'll fall very hard. If a person attributes his success to himself, that's when the Yetzer Hara hits you hardest. And it leads to a downfall very quickly. So the thing that you have to remember all the time is, even when we're succeeding, this is Hashem's Zivug Rishon that caused this. We only did the Zivug Sheni. And at every moment there's really a Zivug Rishon and a Zivug Sheni. Every moment that we're still together, that's a Zivug Rishon. And what we do with that moment, that's a Zivug Sheni. The vessels that we build. Even
In the Zivug Sheni, is it Isha Kshara, it's like Ratzon Hashem Ba'ana, she creates her husband real?
both. Both the Pshat and the Drush. We'll talk about more about that aspect in a moment, about doing each other's will, how that works.
Do you feel like couples can get to this spiritually intuitively, or it's like something that's learned?
I think you have to learn it.
And some people are very resistant to it.
That's first of all, but I don't think I ever was able to. I don't know. I have this feeling about myself, which is wrong. I know it's wrong. That somehow I've known this always. But if I trace it back, I can remember when I started reading it in different places.
Like once you learn it, it opens up.
Right, and then it becomes very natural. But I don't know if people can get to it intuitively.
This stuff isn't in English, is it?
No, this isn't.
This is the kind of stuff, this is what makes Torah Nefesh. To learn
Who is
this.
is this Rav Ginsburg's book?
It's more about Ktuvos. It's on the Maseches Ktuvos, and it's like short essays about different sugyos and Ktuvos. So he does both the Nigla and the Nistar
But this
together.
is Rav Ginsburg, though?
Ken.
He wrote this book?
Yossi Pelli wrote
He
it.
collected this information that was out there. He didn't make this up. He just, right?
It's a good question. I don't know. If you're talking about somebody who has intuition, he does have intuition.
I mean, you think he made up this Zavug?
No,
Rishon?
this you can read in the Arizal. I can give you the source.
He's right.
But to understand exactly
Yes.
how this works, so that's already.
Is he going to start writing in English more often these days? It would be a lot easier.
He doesn't write in Hebrew either, so I don't know what the.
So there has to be more people like you writing in English.
I should at least write from time to time. Okay. Anyway, I want to say something more about the volition. The thing that's missing, we said, from a young couple that got married is their volition. They never wanted it, in a certain sense. They wanted, but they didn't want it. They're not as a mature person. So, in a certain sense, because it's missing, it's very hard to even talk to them in that language. They don't even get it.
Right.
So you're almost creating something from nothing. But once there's a certain a break between them, some kind of crisis, sometimes that's the only way to bring it back. They can't fall back on their nature. They'll have to mature. And that's the perfect moment to introduce volition into the story. That you got married once, but that was in spite of or without regard for what you wanted. And now, if you trust that, if you give that any weight, and maybe you have children already, whatever it is, and you trust Hashem that your zivug rishon, that your nature was correct, so now introduce also your will into the marriage, and want to be married, not just and maybe even make it into I've never seen anybody do this, but maybe even make it into some kind of ceremony. Okay. There's nothing wrong with it.
Maybe like a second chuppah.
That's
Like a second
true.
chuppah, yeah, something
They
like
didn't
that.
have a crisis. They just wanted to do it. They're a good role model.
Who is this?
The Lauries, Alan and Leah Laurie.
They
They had a second marriage. And I think it started, she lost her first wedding ring was stolen.
and she was gonna get another one, and it just built from there.
Ma-
I wanted a second one, it's not Jewish, you're not supposed to have a second one.
Why not?
Second one.
Because I didn't have, well,
I have two.
because I didn't have a big wedding the first time. And I always said, let's do it here and have a nice big wedding, like, it's not, people talk us out of it.
So, I don't have to. I don't
It's
think-
too late now.
To make it into like a big public thing, I don't know. But like to make it into something private that is a commitment between them with volition, I think it makes some sense. Maybe it's not for everybody.
Making it public, made it.
Making it public is more problematic because it has some, I can think of a few halachic issues in it. One of them being that you're not allowed, something that's already been finalized, if you do it again, it casts doubt on the first time. And it almost says that maybe until now they weren't married. So that's why you don't do things like that publicly. But between them you can certainly think of something that can be done. But now what I want to get into is from this, you get into older couples also.
Yeah.
People change over time. And so we don't feel compelled to commitments that we've made in the past. That's one of the biggest problems with life. That after 10, 15, 20 years go by,
Take it for
a
granted.
person says, not the opposite of take it for granted. That was me a long time ago. I'm a different person now.
Then they should commit. But that's what people think.
That's the big
People
deal.
think they change.
No, but he's different because of her. She shaped him.
Said, so she shaped me in a way that doesn't fit anymore, even though she shaped me. Okay. That becomes a big issue, the issue of identity. Do I identify with the person that I was 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago? Or because I feel so differently now, am I now a different person who doesn't have to stay committed to what I wanted, what I committed to 25 years ago, let's say.
So you're saying people should recommit. But these
So hold on. So know that there's there's a real issue like that, especially with men, but with women also.
Yeah, but the same thing like about Judaism. The reason why it is such an amazingly, incredible koach to be a Jew is because it dates back from so long ago.
Right.
So it
You're already
gives it
saying the
so
answer.
much more.
You're already saying the answer. Where do we see this crisis in a bigger sense?
Assimilation.
Not just assimilation. Everybody's not firm. What are they saying? So because my forefathers made some commitment, let's say they really did, so I'm bound by it now. What do you want from me? I didn't make this commitment. The fact that the Medrash tells us that all the neshamos were there, so they say that's just a cop-out. What are you talking about? I don't feel that I was committed to this.
When I didn't grow up with a lot of Torah, I remember the point at which I said to myself, chosen people chose, oh, I can choose. I can choose any holy book.
Yeah.
You know, as long as it's a holy book,
Hmm.
you know. And
Yeah.
it's like, I remember that's
Yeah.
when I started learning.
Because you have choice.
Thank God.
Right?
Well, thank God that's what he chose.
So this is a big deal, and the answer somehow has to come from the fact of how you see your life in general. And I don't have an easy I don't have one solution for this, because some people it works for, some people it doesn't. But certainly, the more continuity a person feels in their being, the easier it is to stand behind who they were many years ago. And the less continuity, the less it's possible. And I have to tell you that the thing that drives continuity or not, I don't know if you remember, this was a class I think that I gave to you. That was to the younger group, the more recent group, was that unfortunately what creates continuity in life is pain.
Pain.
Why?
Why?
I don't know why. I have a lot of theories behind it,
Is
but
that why the Jewish people suffered so much? Is it that you're trying to draw a correlation there?
it has to do with why we have so much continuity. I don't know if that's why we suffered, But the fact that we have such a long memory has to do with suffering. The memory, not just memory in the sense that I've documented what happened. There's this thing, like simple, that the Rebbe used to write to people complaining, why is it that you only write to me when there's something wrong? You never
That's
write
what
to
he
tell me
asked.
about when something good happens. Why? Because when something good happens, some reason,
People forget.
it doesn't stick. I don't know what it is, it just doesn't stick.
But people
It's
don't
not-
ask that for
There's
that.
nothing
They
to
don't
do
care.
with that.
No, but why not tell somebody? It's very uncommon for people to really celebrate
Good thing.
good things.
Right.
But it's very common for them, the moment something negative happens, to run around everywhere trying to get people to give them
That's exactly
sympathy.
right. People should get remarried in big simchas.
Okay,
The more
said it.
simchas, the better.
So,
I don't know, people are so worried about Ayin Hara
Huh?
when good things
They
happen, you know? Here, I
maybe,
don't know.
could be that that's it. But I think it's more than that. It's a feeling of that continuity, that I am the same person that I was. Meaning, if I look back at the good things that happened to me, and I ask, was this me, I don't know, 30 years ago?
Okay,
As opposed to something really terrible that happened to me 30 years ago.
yeah.
Which one will I feel more identified with? I think there's almost no question that with the negative I will identify much more clearly. The sense of identity is stronger when there's pain and suffering. The sense of identity weakens when there's goodness. Now the real reason for that is very easy. I mean, the real reason, I think, there's a lot of theories behind it, but the real reason is quite simple, because we identify with the animal soul. And the animal soul, by definition, is temporary. It's transient. It doesn't touch upon the infinite. So it connects much more easily with the negative than it does with the positive. The animal soul, by definition, is depressed. It's by its nature. Like I always say, if it had its way, I would stay in bed always. I would never get out of bed. If I had my way, meaning if I don't have anything to eat, obviously I'll get out of bed, and then other aspects of the animal soul related to survival kick in. But in general, the animal soul is like Earth. It would rather just stay there, not do anything. If I had to define where the animal soul is, so between Freud's two forces, the will to live and the will to die, there's no question where it's connected to. It's connected to the will to die. And that I have destructive nature inside of me. That's my animal soul, and that's who I identify with. So of course I'll more identify with negative things. But exactly how that plays out and why we don't remember the good things, and there's a lot of studies been done about this, about how well people remember the good things that happen to them and how well they remember the negative things that happen to them. By the way, there's something very interesting that good things are more easily recalled through smell than through any of the other senses.
Interesting.
Because that's the first one.
And the
you-
negative things?
Negative things can also be remembered through smell, but they're more felt. Meaning I can bring it up,
Or emotion.
emotion.
Well, what negative things smell? You know, death.
No, they smell. Like a person was in the hospital for a long time, so they'll have this sense that smell
But it
is
doesn't
negative.
stick until you smell
But
it
good
again.
smells, like good things that happen, there was a particular smell. Sometimes music also works, but smell is the strongest. It right away, like, but sometimes I don't even know why. I just remember that this smell is really, really, really connected to something good. Okay. In any case, it's a trigger. It's a very strong trigger. I would associate it with being that the neshama enjoys the smell, meaning that the not the animal soul, but rather the divine soul enjoys the smell more than any of the other senses. So, unfortunately, for me to get a person to identify with their old self who got married so many years ago is very difficult, because usually marriage is a very happy occasion. So really, I mean, that's what people do. They remind themselves of all the difficult things we've been through.
42 myself.
There you have it.
What?
How does Moshe Rabbeinu convince, like this week's parsha? How do you convince them that they're the same people that came out of Egypt? You remind them all the negative things that happened along the way. You don't remind them the good things. What are the good things?
Because there's nothing to pull through. Once you went through all this,
Okay, and now you're gonna
now you're gonna blow it.
now you're gonna blow it. But I'm saying it's more than that. It's that this is you. You really can't run away from it. It really was that person back then that, and you went through all of this. So it's a very tricky thing how to get somebody to recommit.
So what's the key?
The key is zivug rishon. You have to have a sense of zivug rishon in order to recommit. But like we said, zivug rishon is toe. It's not very. There's not a lot of volition there. So just because it happened to be that we met, because of that, I now have to remain committed forever. If you believe in Hashem and that the Eibishter has a plan, so yes. If you don't believe in it, so it's very difficult. But I would say that if a marriage is going to survive a very difficult phase, it's probably going to have to come through that. Through this strengthening of our understanding that the fact that we're together is not a mistake. And sometimes it doesn't. It's just not enough. People...
So what did you say about going back to the very beginning when things were good? That doesn't help as
It doesn't help because you don't remember that. You don't identify with it the same way that you identify with the negative.
Just to strengthen the fact that we're together because of Hashem, and that's
Right.
it?
Okay?
I don't believe that's true.
What do you mean that's it? There's a lot more, but at the core, yes. In the end, it's the same question about identity. There was a class I gave, I said a few years ago, still when we were in the university. I remember it left a very strong impression on everybody, including myself, because I was talking about the pain as a catalyst for identity, for keeping identity. So the only alternative to that, the only alternative to pain is Hashem. Really, that's the only other option. That if I know that Hashem is keeping score, if you want, that He's writing down everything, like everything is already, it's not lost. For me, most of my life is lost. I can give an accounting of maybe, 0.005% of my life, maybe. I can maybe yesterday, what I did yesterday, maybe I can give 10%. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as you go further back, I know less and less about what I did. So in that sense, only Hashem can give me the sense of continuity. Okay. By the way, that's one of the reasons why some people dedicate themselves so strongly to learning, because it's another thing that can give you some sense of continuity. Okay, because you see the progress, you see the development very clearly when you're learning. You feel it, you feel the development. By the way, it could also be that you're a professor in university, maybe there you also see it. But if you use your mind, so you see development more easily. If it's just events that happen to you, so I don't think you remember so much. Yeah.
I think that whether people even believe in Hashem or not, that thing about remembering the bad things that happen is that in couples therapy is reminiscing about all the bad things that we've been through and we got through together.
Right.
That give us the strength
Right.
to think, okay, we can get through this
Right.
too.
That's what we said before.
Yeah.
So not to be afraid of it, maybe. Maybe that's the only option. But it also bases the marriage on something very negative. So again, I said it's a problem that we have with identity, right?
Then it's your
It's-
note, that's supposed to be.
Nachon, hopefully.
What?
That is.
The tests that we've surmounted together, they give us strength for. Anyway, it's not a simple issue.
But I don't think it's only so negative because the fact that we went through so much is because we had this connection, or else you cannot do it. That's a proof that we together in this. And,
I'm hoping that that's what it leads to, but a lot of times it leads to a feeling of guilt, meaning I was through. how could I leave you now after everything that we've been through? It doesn't sound like such a positive force. It can turn into something very negative, like you're almost trying to hold me by your string. I can't find volition. I don't have a real source for volition except for, well, you've been with me and I've been with you. So, okay, we owe each other.
Oh, actually, that's an argument which is used many times. How could you leave me after all what we went
Right,
through?
right. And it could backfire completely.
Guilt.
But
Right,
couldn't you
that's
flip
true.
it, like, I remember when my kids were in shidduchim, like, so every once in a while there'd be like a girl whose parents were divorced. So the parents are divorced, but I remember part of like the shikul was thinking about my parents who were married for 56 years, my in-laws who were married for 58 years.
What does it tell them?
Devotion, like they were,
Hmm?
and I mean, you know what they went through to some degree from the perspective of the kid, and thinking like, I must have that, and my kids must also have that, like that quality of devotion that comes from the negative, but Oda Dayan, you know, like we're there, we stick it out, we keep on going. So that's a good thing, devotion.
It's a great thing.
Yeah.
But what if parents got divorced, let's say when the kids were older already? Usually, in the fern world, if they're going to get divorced, they wait until all the kids are married, because otherwise it'll hurt the shidduch. but and not anymore. But to some extent, it's still a shikul, it's still a consideration. But that itself shows devotion. Okay. Somebody who got divorced,
Or endurance.
or endurance, but those two, they're very close. So if somebody's parents got divorced at age, 30, I'd be more worried if they got divorced at age 40, and then if they've gotten divorced at age 50. Because
It goes as far as
right,
love.
because they tried. If they got divorced at 30, so not very much there. So maybe that sends a very negative message to the children. But somebody whose parents got divorced, let's say at 18, when they were 18 or 19, I'm not sure that would not necessarily be something negative for the child. It could be done on the contrary. As an adult, they saw how difficult it was, and that they still stuck it out. Or teen years. But it depends on how the child took the message. And some children take the message the wrong way. In the end, there's no way you can prevent it. So maybe that's the message that they got. So I think you have to ask them. I think in the end, like a shadchan would have to ask them, what do you feel? What do you feel about marriages that don't work? Is the answer to get divorced, or is the answer to go to...
As much as that answer really reflects what will
Sure.
pan out over time. Like, who knows? Like, you can think what you think, but when it comes down to it 15 years later, like, who knows?
But that you could say also about somebody who
Anybody, right.
who grew up in a very good home.
Right.
Absolutely.
You're talking about the example, and I think that you're right. The example makes a lot of a difference.
What did you say the trick was? Do you want to, you think about the negative things, but you don't want to think it's negative?
I meant to say that you can't focus on the negative as what gives you identity. You have to find something else. And the only other thing I know of is Hashem Himself.
Oh, right.
And
So you have to have them both. You have to have the
and so
negative
Hashem is
too.
also the negative, fine, but He's also the fact that this is all with a plan. It's not just suffering for the sake of suffering. Like what you said is very right. You changed because of your spouse. But he says, but she changed me to somebody who can't stand her, or he changed me to somebody that can't stand them. Okay, maybe. So that's the issue. With, right.
He just doesn't see it clearly.
Okay. What is then the maturity that I'd like to bring somebody to before they get married? Which we said is like to be already in a state of zivug sheni, but not to lose the naivete about marriage. Okay, so like this is like how you would do hadrachat chatanim if you want.
Right.
Okay, like how to prepare somebody.
Guidance.
Okay. So in the context of a person, we already said it's very simple, but you have to think about how to say it to somebody without breaking them completely. Is that you have to have achna before you have avdana. You have to have shiftless before you have any kind of relationship, any kind of positive relationship. So what does it mean to have shiftless in the context of being single? It's to feel that I'm a half. I'm not whole. That's basically what it means. When do you feel a half? After you've been a whole. You can't feel half before you've been a whole. When people get divorced, if they were married for a time and now they're divorced, that's when they suddenly feel, wait a minute, I'm not my full self. I feel broken. Every person after they get divorced feels broken, even if they tell you that they finally started living. Why? Because lo tov hiyot adam levado. That in the end, even in a bad situation, there's still something completed in a relationship. Even a negative relationship completes you in some way. And so when the relationship ends, you feel lost. It's very hard to feel whole after that. But if somebody's never been married, so how are they going to feel a half? How can they feel that they're lacking something? So before a person gets married, the most that you can do is just explain it. You can't bring them to actually feel it. It's almost impossible. When can you bring them to feel it?
6 weeks later.
Then Hashem brings them to feel it. When can you do this? When they lose something.
Can you give an example?
It could be anything. It could be a favorite, I don't know.
Their iPhone or something.
The what?
The iPhone.
Yeah, their iPhone. Something like that.
Or does it fail shidduch?
Failed shidduch is definitely a place that a person learns how to be, but you don't want to do that to somebody.
You really need to sleep, yeah.
You want me to check into the space of shidduch in order to bring about a higher result, to bring about
So interestingly, from experience, the people who make the best husbands, and even the women who make the best wives, are people who've lost parents.
Oh, wow.
Without, there's no contest. There's just no contest. Because what they experienced, the lack that they felt, here it's a achna'ah that almost at no other level in life do you get. It makes you into a great spouse. Men also. With men, it's particularly with the mother. With women, it's more with the father, but it doesn't matter really. It could be either or.
Once they've lost their father or mother, they then become a better spouse?
They become a great spouse because they've already been broken.
And the one who are often young?
No, if they're very young, it's something else. But no, 12, yeah. Those are the ages.
What about a child coming from a divorced home?
So sometimes it becomes exactly the opposite, depending on how they take it. What did they understand from that? They understood that you can't take marriage for granted. If they understand my parents
Can't take life for granted.
didn't stop loving each other, they still love each other or whatever it was, but they couldn't work at it anymore. If that's what they understand, so it's a positive thing. They understand that it takes work. It's a tremendous understanding. If a person's willing to get married after that, that means that they, to a large degree, they understand what it means.
That's cool.
Okay?
Most of us lose somebody while we're married.
While you're married. Here we're talking about. So this I've seen time and time again, that the best spouses are unfortunately the people that have lost somebody early in life. And it's unbelievable what it does to a person. Okay, so now we don't have enough. The next stage is, what does it mean to mature somebody once they're married? How do you bring them from zivug rishon to zivug sheni?
That'll be next week.
So we'll do that next week.
Next week.
I said, oh.
Are we having a break? Do you want to remember?
Yeah, I thought that's a good idea. So if Effie wants to
What's a good
continue.
idea?
So at least we'll have one more, there's only one more before Tisha B'Av. Right?
Why don't
So
we get
yeah, so let's do it now. So.
Yes, I'll watch this first. You have to, will you come in and look at my
So we
computer
will
before
meet
you
next
leave?
week.